Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to one more week of the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. And this week, joining us from the US is Doug Rabow. Is it Rabow I pronounce your last name? Hey, Doug, welcome to the show.
Yeah, that's pretty close. Rabow, but that's okay. Nobody
Rabow. All right, I'll do that. I'll do that from now on. I will do that. Thank you for correcting me. I am very famous for the mispronunciation of people's names, and I apologize for that. So Doug is a passionate practitioner of Lean-Agile strategic management with a focus on developing empowered teams and lean process improvement. That speaks to my heart. I'm a big lean fan. That's where I started before Agile. So Doug, I'm really excited to have you on the show and explore your story. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and how did you end up becoming a Scrum Master?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a pleasure to be able to join you here today. As far as how I became a Scrum Master, it's definitely been a bit of a winding journey. So there's nothing about my career history that makes too much sense. My first career in my 20s, I actually did an apprenticeship, a 3-year apprenticeship to become a licensed mobile truck crane operator. So big telescopic truck mounted cranes. Coolest thing I've done in my life, but it wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. So went back to school, got a 2-year business diploma, and went to work in the wine industry and literally said, I'm going to work in the wine industry. I have no idea what that'll be. But I ended up working in my first job for a small chain of retail stores where I had the opportunity to do a business development project for the owner of the company there. And that was where I really got interested in strategic management. So that's where I started, literally just dove into every book I could find on operations management, on strategic management, some amazing, some not so much, but kind of picking through and learning as much as I can. And then after 6 years in the wine industry, I went back to school again to get my 4-year business degree. And that's where I ended up in an IT setting, actually under a project analyst title at first. It was really interesting because we were both using project management teams and agile teams at the same time. So it was a really interesting kind of first place for me to dip a toe in and really come to my own conclusions about what I saw working and what I saw not working. So my current title is Agile Operations Lead, where I work. It's a mix of some operations focused work, some process development work, and I also work as a Scrum Master as well. And so for me, it was really that lean strategic background and learning a lot from our Agile teams and that whole just the Agile perspective that allowed me to kind of take my facilitation skills and start working with the team as a Scrum Master as well. So that's kind of my journey to
that is definitely a varied and diverse background you got there. And I'm sure you learned a lot from all of those different perspectives that you still apply today as a Scrum Master. And some of those might even help us in tough moments. And a tough moment is what we're going to talk about next, Doug. Of course, today is Monday, Fail Monday, here on the podcast. So we want to explore one story where you did your best as a Scrum Master, but of course, the best just wasn't good enough so often happens to us. Now, we learn a lot. We'll dive into the lessons learned and the takeaways later. But first, tell us that story, Doug.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so the one thing I want to add here is maybe just a little bit of context in terms of what we're talking about when we talk about failure, because I think there's two very different topics here. So there's certainly and we can introduce a little humility on my part in this one. There's times where, maybe I failed on a personal level as a facilitator. I think that's just part of it. And I'll certainly go into some details about some lessons that I've learned. But just that continual growth as a facilitator is, I think, something that we all go through. But then the other side of it is, I think, what most people, often you'll hear people refer to it as fail fast. Of course, we're talking about whether the team was successful in delivering whatever was required. And I think that is definitely a slightly different conversation, but it's at the heart of why we're talking about Agile in the first place. So it's okay, I might just touch on kind of on both sides of that as well. So one thing I can say that I learned as a facilitator, and because I've had a varied career, I'll actually tell a short story from something that wasn't a Scrum environment. But basically what happened is I had taken on a role, wasn't a manager, but definitely had a supervisory responsibility into an environment that, I'd come from a slightly more competitive environment into a slightly less competitive environment. And right away when I showed up, there was clear there was a bunch of specific actionable things that we could just start doing differently tomorrow that would result in better outcomes. And it wasn't well received. One of the things that I absolutely took away from that as a learning experience, and it was a very humbling learning experience, was not to try to drive change unless you have support from it.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more, Doug. So I imagine you coming to that organization and having a lot of experience of maybe fast-paced and demanding environments. And then you get there and you see, oh, okay, we could do this and that and so on. And did you set up a call? Did you set up a meeting? Did you start to, throw on the table all of these ideas? How did you start introducing what you saw?
Absolutely. So this was an entirely in-person group. And the real challenge, it was probably bringing a few too many things forward too quickly. But the other issue is that the group there didn't see a need for change. They were perfectly happy with the way things were going right now. And that was really the big lesson there. And kind of, for me, what it means to make sure you have that support is if you're trying to drive a change, but the people involved in that change don't see the need for that to happen, you're not going to be successful in trying to move that change forward, even if you are right about all of the things that you want to do. So for me, that really speaks back to the extent to which we need to involve people in the change. And really step one, and how I've been able to apply this as a Scrum Master, especially starting with a new team, is does the team agree that this is a problem? Is this something that we should even be solving for in the first place? And so having that buy-in was just such a critical lesson for me, and something that I've kind of taken and applied to everything I've done since then. It's certainly always a humbling lesson. I might just take a minute to speak about the other side of that coin when we talk about failures in terms of initiatives and projects and things like that. Part of the reason that I find the Agile perspective so valuable is that we do a really great job of being able to mitigate that risk of failure by just getting constant feedback. So really, when we're having our daily check-ins to make sure we're still aligned in terms of the direction that we're going in, if we're working in sprints, we're kind of circling back with the product owner, making sure our vision of where we're going is still accurate. You can never really fail for more than 2 to 3 days at a time. For me, Agile really is a response to these long lead times where we're doing 2, 4, 6 months of building before we put anything into production, before we show the customer anything that we built. That's where we introduce huge opportunities for failure. So as a team, I would say that we fail constantly. We fail on a daily basis. We'll start building something and realize either that the requirements were not complete, maybe it wasn't what was actually needed. But those failures really are scaled down to the level of 1 or 2 days at a time. And that's the sort of thing that kind of just gets absorbed as part of your schedule.
For me, that is actually a very important point. In fact, in a little bit glib way, I have said many times that Agile can be narrowed down to only one thing, and that is to always shorten the feedback cycle. No matter how long it is, just make it shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And of course, ideally, it needs to be painful, right? If we say, oh, it would be so hard to get anything to show by then that sparks our curiosity and innovation to think about how can we show an increment of value in that shorter time frame and get feedback. And that feedback, in my mind at least, is critical for Agile as well as you said, to avoid bigger risks. And I think this is one aspect that doesn't get enough airtime, which is the idea that in Agile, we subvert the idea of risk management. And instead of thinking about risks and keeping an eye on them, we think about risks and make sure we bump into the opportunity of those risks as early as possible so that we get feedback. Because a lot of the risks we face in software development, are risks about unknowns. They are things we don't know. I mean, they could be technological, social, or people related, or market related, but they are things we need feedback on, right? And that feedback cycle being shorter really helps us to get exposed to those risks, therefore learn and adapt much faster.
Yeah, all hugely important things that I agree with, but I love particularly the call out about, we're starting to come up with our plan of what we're going to build. Oh, but yeah, we have to do this bit first, and it's going to take 2 months. That's the point where we really do want to challenge ourselves and go, are we sure that there is no other way that we could, build a piece of this and build a piece of that, and have that be a completed piece of value that we can deliver and show to our customer. That really is the challenge. And yeah, absolutely. When we find ourselves in that situation, that's where we really want to embrace that challenge and to test ourselves and try to find new ways of building things. And it's going to be different in every context. But yeah, such an important call out.
Yeah. And one way in which we could rephrase that famous phrase of fail fast is get feedback fast.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of conversation around that term fail fast. I certainly understand why. I don't feel that fail fast is ever the goal. Truly, if you're part of a continuous improvement process, for me, failure is more of an artifact. What it's saying is that, we have a bunch of assumptions that we think are true. We're going to go test those assumptions to find out if maybe we're wrong about those things. And failure is certainly one of the outcomes that we may experience. But for sure, failure is never the goal. The goal is to learn, to iterate, to test assumptions, and to be constantly working towards some sort of an objective, which in this case is solving a problem for our customers.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Doug.
Absolutely.
Monday is about what we learn from our obstacles and our failures. But tomorrow is Team Tuesday here on the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast. We explore teams and their journeys, the habits they develop that threaten their performance, how each of our guests help their teams evolve, and the one key lesson they learned from that experience. We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.